We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Dalet Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 54b. The Gemara said in the previous Amud, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that the Baal Habor is only liable if the animal that falls in is an animal that's a cheresh, shota v'katan. And the Gemara now says, well, according to that, hashor shu pikeach pater, is that implying that if it's an intelligent shore, then the Baal Habor is pater? And right now the Gemara says, hashor v'hu pikeach pater bitmiya. That's a wonder. Why would you be pater? Why would the Baal Habor be pater in that case? And the Gemara first says, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, lo mi boy kamra. What the Mishnah means to say, not only this, but even this. What it means is, lo mi boy shor shupi kayach dechayev. We don't even need to say that a shore that's intelligent, most certainly the Baal Habor is chayev. Avol shor cheresh shota v'katan, but maybe if it's a shore that's deaf or an imbecile or a minor shore, ema chershuso garmolo kitnuso garmolo. Maybe you would say the fact that it was deaf, that caused the injury. The fact that it was a minor, that's what caused the injury. The lifter, and therefore you might say the Baal Habor is pater. Kamash malan. That's what the Mishnah is teaching, that even in these cases, the Baal Habor is chayev. But the Gemara says that can't be correct. Amarle Ravacha Ravina, Ravacha said to Ravina V'atanya. But we learned in a brayso nafal isocho bar das pater, that if an intelligent animal falls in, then the Baal Habor is in fact pater. My lav, is it not shore bar das? Doesn't it mean to say that if a shore that has intelligence falls in, that the Baal Habor is pater? Amarle, so he said back to him, Ravina said back to Ravacha, not necessarily. Lo no adam, it might be that a person is falling in. That's what the brayso means. If a bar das, a person falls in, then the Baal Habor is pater. But the Gemara says, is that really possible? But according to that, Adam ben das hu de pater, are you only going to say a person with das, that only then the Baal Habor is pater? Halab ben das hu de chayev, but if you're going to say, but then you're going to say that if it's not a ben das, if it's a person without das, suddenly the Baal Habor is chayev. That's not true. Shor v'lo adam ksiv, it says shor and not a person, meaning all people are excluded. Ella rather, the Gemara says, my ben das. What does ben das mean? Maybe it means min ben das. Maybe it means a species, meaning a type of creature that has das, meaning a person, and we really are talking about all people are being excluded in this brayso. But the Gemara says still, Amarle, he said back to him, V'atanya, but we learned in a brayso, Nafal isocho shor ben das pater. It says explicitly that if a shore that has intelligence falls in, then the Baal Habor is pater. So we see clearly that if a shore has intelligence and falls into the bor, then the Baal Habor is pater. And so Elam Rava, rather Rava says, shor v'hu cheresh, shor v'hu shota, shor v'hu katan dafka. It's only if the shore is a cheresh, a shota, or a katan, only then is the Baal Habor chayiv. Aval shor v'hu pikeach pater. But if a shore with intelligence falls in, the Baal Habor actually is pater. My time, what's the reason? De boy le yune umezel. Because such a shore really should be looking where it's going, and therefore it's not really considered to be the fault of the Baal Habor. And the Gemara says, Tanya nami hachi, we have a brayso that supports this as well. Nafal asocho shor cheresh shota v'katan v'sumo mahalech b'layla chayev. If into the pit falls a shore that's a cheresh, a shota, a katan, or sumo, or blind, or it's walking at night so it can't see, in all of those cases the Baal Habor is chayev. However, pikeach or mahalech b'yom, but if it's an intelligent shore and it's walking during the daytime when it should have seen where it is going, pater, so in that case the Baal Habor is pater. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Echad shor v'echad kol behema, whether we're talking about a shore or whether we're talking about all animals, meaning the following halachas apply to all animals, even though the pasuk doesn't specify all animals, the halachas do apply to all animals in all of the following cases. L'nefilas habor, first of all, in terms of falling into a pit, that the owner of the pit is liable, that applies by all animals. We'll have frashas har Sinai, and also the animals had to be separated from har Sinai. At the time of the giving of the Torah, they couldn't go on har Sinai, that was all animals. Well, the tashlume kefil, also the double payment that has to be made by a thief, that applies if he steals all animals. Well, hashavas aveda, the idea of returning lost objects, that applies to all lost animals. Leprika, unloading an animal, applies to all animals. Lechasima, muzzling an animal, that applies to all animals, that it shouldn't eat from others' fields. Lekilayim, all of the halachas of kilayim that apply to animals apply to all animals. Well, the Shabbos and the halacha on Shabbos that you're not allowed to work your animals applies to all animals. V'chein chayav va'of, and it would apply likewise to wild animals, and it applies likewise to birds. Kayotze ben, all of these halachas are similar. Imkain, if so, lama nemar shor o chamor, why does the pasuk say an ox or a donkey? Why does it specify kinds of animals if it applies to all animals? Ela shadiber hakasab behova, the pasuk just speaks about the normal cases, but again it applies to all animals in all of these cases. And Rashi explains, Ula hafrashas har Sinai, separating from har Sinai, it says im behema im ish ksiv, it says behema and ish. So behema is a domesticated animal. V'anon marbinan chayev of begamara, we include even undomesticated animals, animals and birds in the Gemara as well. Uletashlume kefil, and for paying the double payment, v'afagav dechsiv mishor v'ad chamor, even though again the pasuk says shor ad chamor, sha'ar behema v'chayim arbinam begemara v'chayim bechulu, we include all kinds of animals and undomesticated animals as well in the Gemara. Leprika azov ta'azovimo, again that's for unloading the animal that's overburdened. Lekilayim, by kilayim we have a couple halachas of kilayim by animals. First of all, the harba, we have the mixing of animals in terms of creating a different kind of breed. Afagav dechsiv behemtecha lo sarbia kilayim, even though it says behema, havanami chaya v'of bechlal chaya and of are also included, kediyalef begemara, like we learn in the Gemara. V'chein linyan kilayim dahan haga de lo tachrosh b'shor v'chamor. Also by kilayim there's halacha they are now to plow together with an ox and a donkey. So also over there it applies to all animals. Behove bedover harag elios. Behove means again the pasuk just speaks about normal cases, but it includes all animals. And the Gemara says, L'nefila sabor, how do we know that when it comes to falling into a pit, the liability applies to all animals? And that's, as we said earlier, kesef yashiv l'ba'olav, it says that the money is returned to the owner. Ksiv, that's what's written in the pasuk, called the islay bailim keda amrin. That means anyone that has an owner, or anything that can have an owner, as we said earlier. Lahafrashas har Sinai, and then for the separation, not to go on har Sinai, how do we know that applies? In behema imish lo yichya, it says behema imish in the pasuk. V'chaya bechlal behema havin, we understand that chaya, undomesticated animals, are included in the term behema, and im l'rabos esa ofos, the word im includes birds as well. And l'tashlume kefil, when it comes to the double payment that a thief has to pay, that a ganav has to pay, kidam rinon, that's, as we say, Al kol devar pesha, as the pasuk says by kefil, al kol devar pesha, kol al kol devar pshia. It includes all things that are bar pshia. That means to say, as Rashi says, l'tashlume kefil al kol devar pesha, al shor al kol devar pshia, v'afilu davar she'ein bo ruach chaim, means even something that is not alive, beperik meruba, that's learned out in perik meruba. That's how we learn out in terms of, again, tashlume kefil, that it applies to anything. Lahashavas aveda, how do we learn this out by hashavas aveda? It says l'chol aveda sachicha, it says l'chol aveda sachicha, that includes, again, all items. Leprika, when it comes to unloading the animal, yolif chamor mishabes, we learn out it says chamor over by prika, and it also says chamor by Shabbos. Just like by Shabbos it's all animals, so too when it comes to unloading the animal. Lechasima, when it comes to muzzling the animal, yolif shor mishabes, we learn out the word shor, it says by Shabbos shor, and it says by chasima shor, so we learn out again it applies to all animals. Lekilayim, and when we're talking about kilayim, again it depends which kilayim. Ikilayim de charish, if you're talking about the kilayim of plowing with two different kinds of animals, Yolif shor mishabes. Again, we learn out shor from Shabbos, and ikilayim de harva, if it's the kilayim of harva that's mating the animals, Yolif behemtecha mishabes. We learn out also from Shabbos. It says behemtecha by Shabbos, and it says behemtecha by kilayim of harva. And so the Gemara now needs to find the source by Shabbos. The Gabe Shabbos Menolan, how do we know by Shabbos that it applies to all animals? The Tanyas we learned in a Brayso, Rabbi Yossi Omer Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yossi says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, B'dibros harishonos. In the first Aseres HaDibros Nemar, it says Avdecha v'Amosecha uvehemtecha uvedibros ha'achronos, and in the later Aseres HaDibros Nemar it says V'shorcha v'chamorcha v'chol behemtecha. So there it says Shorcha and Chamorcha, whereas again in the first it just says Behemtecha. V'alo shor v'chamor b'chlal kol behema. How you weren't shor and chamor included in all animals. V'lama yatsu, why are they specified over here? Lomar lach, it's to tell you, mashor v'chamor ha'amor kan chaya v'of kayotze b'hen. Just like when it says shor and chamor over here, that includes undomesticated animals, that includes birds as well. Af kol chaya v'of kayotze b'hen. So too, in all situations, chaya and of are considered similar. And Rashi explains, mashor v'chamor ha'amor kan chaya v'of kayotze b'hen. Just like the shor and chamor over here, it includes chaya and of. Or the kamem mefarish time, and the Gemara is going to explain later on exactly why that's included. Mi v'chol, it comes from the word v'chol, to mashma riboy, that's mashma in inclusion. The point is, af kol makom shenemar shor v'chamor, we learn out any time it says shor and chamor, kagon prika, v'chasima, v'domelan, like all these cases that we mentioned above, unloading, muzzling, etc. Chayev of, kayotze b'hen, chayev of are also included. But the Gemara continues, Ema behema de dibros harishonos klal. Why don't we say that the word behema in the first Aseres HaDibros is a klal? That's a generalization. And shorcha v'chamorcha de dibros ha'achronos prat. And then we'll say that the shorcha and chamorcha in the later Aseres HaDibros is a specification, is a prat. And we should say klalu prat ein bechlal elamasha beprat. Maybe we should say when you have a klal and prat, you only include the prat, and it would only apply to shor and chamor. Shor v'chamor in midi achrina lo. A shor and chamor, yes. Other things would not be included. And the Gemara says, as Rashi just noted, Amri, they answer, V'chol behemtecha, the dibros ha'achronos chazer u'klal. When it says V'chol behemtecha in the later Aseres HaDibros, that's also a klal, that's also a generalization. Klalu pratu klal, yatadan elokena prat. When you have a klalu pratu klal, we say that it has to be similar, it's anything, and includes anything similar to the prat. Ma'aprat mefurish balei chayim, just like the prat is something that's alive, af kol balei chayim. So too all living animals are going to be included in this prohibition of labor on Shabbos. But the Gemara says, Ve'ema mahaprat mefurish davar shenevlasu matami b'mago v'masa. Why don't we say that shor and chamor are unique because there the nevel is matami when you touch it, when you carry it. Af kol davar shenevlasu matami b'mago v'masa. So too we should only include animals that the nevel is tummy when you touch it or carry it. Aval ofos lo, and that would mean that ofos are not included. Maybe we should exclude ofos, we should exclude birds. So Amri, they answer to that, if that was the case, it could have just written one prat, and the fact that it wrote two prats, that comes to exclude ofos. That's why it writes both shor and chamor. But the Gemara says, similar to what it said earlier, hey nichtov, well, which one of the ones could have been written? Hey nichtov rachmana, which one should the pasuk write? Ikas of rachmana shor, because if the pasuk only wrote shor, have amina karv l'gavim mizbeach in, sheina karv l'gavim mizbeach lo. I might think the halacha only applies to animals brought on the mizbeach, not to animals that are not brought on the mizbeach. And so kas of rachmana chamor, so therefore the pasuk does need to write chamor. Because of rachmana chamor, and if the pasuk only wrote chamor, have amina karish bevechora, and I might think only animals that have the sanctity of firstborn, only those are included in this halacha of working the animals on Shabbos. She'en karish bevechora lo, but animals that are not holy in terms of bechora, in terms of the firstborn, they are not included. So kas of rachmana shor, so the pasuk does need to write shor. So actually we do need to write both shor and chamor, and so we still need to know, how do we know to include ofos? And so rather the Gemara says v'chol behemtecha ribuyahu. The word v'chol behemtecha is actually a riboy, it's actually an inclusion, and that includes the birds, that includes the ofos, again as Rashi pointed out. And the Gemara continues, v'chol hecha the kasav rachmana kol ribuyahu, but is it really true that anytime the pasuk writes the word v'chol, that's an inclusion? Is that really true? V'hagabe meiser dechsev, what about by meiser? It's written in the pasuk kol, it says the word kol. The kadarshin and le b'chlalu prat, and there we don't say that it's an inclusion, we darshan it as a klalu prat. The Tanyas we learned in a brayso of an asata hakesef b'chol asher ta'ava nafshecha. It's talking about redeeming the meiser sheni onto money. So it says that you put the money, you spend the money b'chol asher ta'ava nafshecha klal. That sounds like a klal. It's a generalization on anything. Ba'bakar uvatzon uvayayin uvashecher. But then it says specific things that you're spending the money on. Bakar, tzon, yayin, and shecher prat. That's a specification. Uv'chol asher t'sholcha nafshecha. And then it says on anything. Once again, chazer uklal. That's another generalization. And there we say klalu pratu klal yatadon elokena prat. That when you have a klal pratu klal, it's only things that are similar to the prat. It's not a full inclusion. And we say maha prat mefurish pri mi pri v'gidulei karka. Just like all the things that are specified are things that are fruits that grow from another fruit, that come from something else, and they gidulei karka means they grow from the ground or they get their sustenance from the ground. Av kol pri mi pri v'gidulei karka. So too, we're only going to spend this money on pri mi pri v'gidulei karka. It's not considered to be a complete inclusion. Why not? We just said that it's considered to be a complete inclusion when it comes to the halachas of doing work on Shabbos. And the Gemara says, Amri bakol kilola, kol ribuya. So they answer that if it says bakol, so then that's a generalization. That's what it says by the Meiser Sheni. It says bakol, so we darshan klalu pratu klal. But if it says kol, that's already considered to be an inclusion. If you want, I could say another answer, kol nami klolahu. The word kol also can be a generalization. It's not necessarily an inclusion just because it's kol. Miyu hai kol dahacha ribuyahu. Nevertheless, the kol over here actually is an inclusion by the Aseres HaDibros. Midahavale lemichtav uvehemtecha, because it could have just written uvehemtecha. Like it says in the first Aseres HaDibros, v'chasav v'chol behemtecha, but instead it says the word v'chol behemtecha, shmami no ribuyi, so you see that it's considered to be an inclusion. And Rashi explains pri mi pri, when it comes to spending the money of the Meiser Sheni, it has to be pri mi pri and gidulei karka. What's pri mi pri? Vlad mi vlad. That means it's something that's a growth from something else that grows, meaning yayin me'anavim. For example, wine comes from grapes. The shecher mi tamarim, and shecher comes from tamarim, from dates. Lamu'ute kmeinu pitrios umayim v'melech. That would exclude things like kmein and pitrios, like mushrooms, like water, like salt. De'eno pri mi pri. Those are not considered to be pri mi pri. The gidulei karka, and gidulei karka, what is that? Lamu'ute dogim. That comes to exclude fish, because they are not gedulei karka, rather they are raised in the water. She'eino nikachen bekesef meiser. You're not allowed to buy dogim, you're not allowed to buy fish with the kesef meiser, with the money of Meiser Sheni. But the Gemara continues, Hashta da amrit kol ribuyuhu, but now that you're saying that the word kol in the Aseres HaDibros is an inclusion, and we include all kinds of animals, so behemtecha de dibros harishonos, when it says behemtecha, by the first Aseres HaDibros, v'shor v'chamor de dibros ha'achronos, and when it says shor and chamor in the later Aseres HaDibros, lamali, what do we need those words for? Because we're including all animals. And the Gemara says, Amri, they answer as follows, shor la'agmure, shor la'chasima, we need the word shor, because we're learning by muzzling that it applies to all animals, again with the Gzeres Shava of shore. Chamor la'agmure, chamor leprika, when it comes to chamor also, we have a Gzeres Shava by unloading the animal using the word chamor, and behemtecha la'agmure, behemtecha lekilayim, and the word behemtecha is also for Gzeres Shava, to learn this halacha to kilayim, that it applies by all animals. And the Gemara continues, Ihachi, if so, afilu adam litzer, then even by a person it should also be prohibited. And Rashi says, Adam nami litzer limshoch bekaronim habehema. When it comes to, let's say, kilayim, again, there's a halacha that you're not allowed to plow with two different kinds of animals. A person also should not be allowed to pull together with an animal. To hagabe Shabbos muzr kebehema, because when it comes to Shabbos, the halachas of doing work on Shabbos, a person is warned just like an animal. It talks about your servant and your maidservant and your animal. And so therefore, by kilayim, when it comes to, again, plowing together with another species, that should also be prohibited if it's a person. But alama tanan, so why do we learn in the Mishnah adam mutter im kulon lachrosh v'limshach, that a person is allowed with all animals to plow and to pull? Why is that the case? And the Gemara says, Amar Papa says, Papunoi yodi taima dehamilsa, the Papunoi know the answer to this question. Rashi says, Papunoi b'nei Papunoi shemakum, that's the people of Papunoi. Papunoi was the name of a place. Umanu, and who is this Papunoi that we're referring to? Rav Acha bar Yaakov, it refers to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, and what's the answer? Amar Kratz, because the Pasuk says, L'man yanuach avducha v'amoscha kamocha, it says in order that your slave and your maidservant, that they rest like you, L'hanochi kashtiv v'lo l'davar acher, and only in terms of the halachas of resting on Shabbos, there we say that it applies to people equally, but in terms of other prohibitions, it does not apply to people equally. And Rashi explains, Lahanochi kashtiv, in terms of the halach of resting on Shabbos, there we compare Eved v'yama lebehema, there we compare the Eved and the Yama to the animal, avalo le'inyan isur acher, but not in terms of other isurim, in terms of other prohibitions. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Shal Rabbi Chanina ben Ogil es Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Chanina ben Ogil asked Rabbi Chia bar Abba the following question, Mipnei ma bedibros harishonos lo namar bahem tov v'dibros ha'achronos, why is it that in the first Aseres HaDibros it doesn't say the word tov, whereas in the dibros ha'achronos? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph.